Welcome to Blind Shovel, an arts and music podcast. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with LA-based musician Alex Pfender. Hope you enjoy.
Alex Pfender. Alex
Hello.
Yo.
Okay.
So what were you working on today?
What we're working on today. Well, I just finished a whole bunch of things and I'm about to start some other things. So I'm kind of in a little transition day or two while I clean up my studio and put my life back together and start in on the next thing. Just did this show for an artist that I've been producing who released their record on Friday. And so we did a release show for that. And they also, I produced an acoustic version of that same record, which we just finished recording at Altamira Sound here in Alhambra. I say here, but I don't live in Alhambra, but in Alhambra, LA, for those who don't know. And I'm going to start in on mixing that today. So that's my thing.
What percentage of your time do you spend working on personal projects versus projects that are collaborative with other people?
Currently, I would put my personal project percentage at something like 5 to 10%. Mm-hmm. Very low right now, because even my most personal, even one of my more personal projects is a collaboration. So it's like, in terms of strictly personal, which those projects do exist, it's been a little bit since I focused on that.
Does that bother you, or is that something you accept?
It's something I accept, but I am right now coming to the end of a roughly 2-year period where that's really kicked into high gear, and I'm starting to be tired of it now. So I'm
right.
Aiming to swing the pendulum back in the coming, for the rest of this year and into the next.
I mean, how old are you now?
36.
And do you feel like you understand the singular voice that you're trying to communicate in your personal work?
I felt like the last release I made, which was a single called Alice, One More Week. The one more week was in parentheses. This is under my solo project, which is called Pfred with a silent P, P-F-R-E-D, because that's like my last name spelled with the silent P, and Fred's my middle name. So that's what that comes from. But the last, I put out an EP with that project, the first thing I had made, and it took forever. And by the end of it, I was like, this doesn't really feel quite right yet. I was really proud of that work, and I made it with a really great friend of mine who actually engineered and had a lot to do with my band Yo-Yo's first record, and second EP as well, named Jack Zofel, and he's the best. And he and I made that EP together, which was really fun process. But in the end, after it came out and I sort of took a step away and then came back to it, I was like, I'm glad I made this and it was necessary, but it's not quite right. And then I felt a lot more strongly about this single Alice, that it was much more like, okay, yeah, this is something I want to say and how I want to say it. And did this video with a good friend of mine who's who Zach Johnston, who we made this video in collaboration with my fiance, who did the costuming for it, and that felt really good. And so I kind of want to continue in that vein. Jack and I actually collaborated on another song of mine that I've been sitting on for like a decade that I plan to put out in this coming period. And I'm really proud of that one. And I think that also sort of like feels really correct for my voice, but there's definitely some mystery involved. So I'm excited to see what happens.
Because would it be accurate to say that I think you went to school for music, right?
I did. Yeah, I studied guitar.
Yeah, I mean, when I interview a lot of musicians, I feel like it's very different than the arts because so often you're involved with other people on projects, collaborating, even if it's commercial or just, a passion project. So there's really no analogy I can make for a visual artist often. Mm-hmm. But how much time have you spent since college trying to figure out that personal project or that personal identity in respect to making music?
It was my sole focus out of college for maybe 5 or 6 years. That was when I graduated in 2009, and moved back home to Oregon briefly, but then moved to LA again, and which is where I went to college, and started Yoya in earnest. And that was me and my friend Noah Dietrich. And we just, that was my main thing, was just figuring out how to do that band. And so we wrote a bunch of music and made a record and toured constantly and did follow-up things, singles and EP. So I spent a lot of time focusing on that only, to the exclusion of many other things. And it was super exciting, and I felt like it was really, really expressively like accurate at first, and really felt like exactly what I wanted to do and say, and it was great. And then as time went on, I sort of like had this issue where I was not as happy with the work I was making, and despite like really like dedicating a lot of time to it, it just didn't, I don't know, it was this weird thing that was happening where I wasn't getting this feedback loop happening between the work and myself, where sometimes when you're really in a good place, you're putting your creative energy into something and it's like surprising you or inspiring you as you work on it. And it's sort of this, and that's like the perfect state, because then you kind of have this accelerating like feeling where it's just kind of exponentially getting better. That's sort of been my experience. And then that sort of ceased to happen for a while, where I was like putting a lot of energy in, but then when I would try to, I don't know, it just wasn't seem like I mean, it's just a long, complicated way of saying I wasn't liking what I was writing. And
no, there's more to it than that, I think.
Yeah.
So in respect to not feeling it in a collaborative project, is it easy to tell when that has to do with the other people or person involved in the project, or is it more about the muse or the collective energy? In other words, do you think those things are inseparable?
I think it's, in my experience, at least with this project, yeah, I think it is, you can tell the difference. And I feel like the difference is that, you know, like earlier when we started, I had like a lot of certainty about what I was doing. And I had that thing that I was mentioning, this sort of feedback loop that was happening, this positive feedback loop where I was creating things and I was inspired by the creation and it was leading me to more creative things. And it was like all sort of happening for me. And the collaboration, which is like a super long standing collaboration because we've done other projects together and whatnot, was good, but not without its, contentions, as any collaboration is going to have. So we had those, and I felt like, whatever, we did our best to deal with them, but I could definitely tell that was not at all the same thing that was happening later, where I felt like my collaborative partner was doing really good work and I was like struggling to match it. And it was really like taking the wind out of my sails because it was hard for me to like, I don't know, it sort of felt like I was like, okay, am I going to just lean into this and like just take a back seat, or am I going to keep trying to like bring everything I can to the table? And of course I did that, but it just was like a real struggle for me. So, so that sort of, that happened. We made a record and it was cool, and I'm proud of the record, but it was, by the time it was done, it was so close to it. And I felt so sort of like that I hadn't quite done it correctly, that it was just a challenge. And I haven't actually revisited it for a while, so I don't really know how I feel about it now. But
yeah, I just wanted to ask if both of you felt that way.
I don't think so.
That's weird.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I mentioned these things, of course, at the time, and then I was just like, man, this is like really hard for me, and and yeah, I think it was probably frustrating for them.
Yeah, it just sounds like marriage in some ways, where like, I've thought about this quite a bit in relationship to like, people will leave marriages because they feel like they're not in love anymore. And if you really think about that, it's kind of a funny reason, especially when like I've worked on projects that have taken 3 years, and I don't know what percentage of time I was quote unquote in love with the project for.
Right.
I don't think much, if I'm being honest. It's mostly just like a thing you really push through. But it's even further interesting that the other person might not even know. And
right.
Like they might be completely feeling it. Yeah, I think that's an interesting, that's why I'm impressed by like Radiohead or something, a band that can keep going.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, the main thing, in the main lesson that I wish I had sort of internalized earlier, that it's not for lack of being told. I was told this a lot, but it's just like, you just have to keep going and keep creating. And that's kind of like what I tried to do. And I guess I succeeded because we did create stuff, but it was just much more challenging. And I think that overall, I want to sort of adopt a faster clip, because I think it is sort of the only good way to make art. And I actually think that's why, well, I don't know, that's kind of an extreme statement, but
go ahead.
For me, I think that it just is very attractive to me. And
what is
making art quickly?
How are these related? What do you feel the speed is kind of mitigating?
The speed is mitigating over editing and like cyclical thought patterns, where you're like part of me thinks that if I had just somehow managed halfway or a quarter of the way into that process, that difficult creative process, just force myself to finish it.
Yeah.
Instead of continuing to wonder why it wasn't working, or like examine, try to pick apart what it was I didn't like about it. I think it would have been smarter, and maybe now I'm equipped to do this should it happen again. It's just like, it's just a natural thing that'll happen when you're creating stuff, and there's no need to waste time on it. Just finish the thing you're making, and move on to the next thing. I think I used to be just like, I think a lot of millennials, at least because those are the musicians I talk to the most, share this sentiment that we all kind of think that somehow we like, because of who our musical heroes may have been in our formative years, some of us got this idea that like this conception of the perfect singular masterpiece, and that's what you're striving for, to create a masterpiece album. And if you don't do that, you're not really succeeding. Whereas I think that what I've learned anyway is that it seems a lot more like those things just kind of happen through this strange alchemy of factors, and you just have to keep creating. And if you're not making a masterpiece, you don't need to stop and be like, oh no, why am I not making a masterpiece? I need to make sure that this thing is a masterpiece. It's like, no, just finish whatever this thing is that you're doing. Maybe the masterpiece will be the next one.
It's certainly it's a really difficult balancing act, especially with the speed of social media these days, because then you have the opposing temptation, which is to create frivolous work very quickly,
right,
just to be seen. So I think the answer is somewhere in between. I think there's definitely ways to become neurotic about the particular issues of a relationship or a project where it just completely isn't in the service of it being refined. So I think it is about, it's like, I guess, you have to develop trust with what's best for the idea, which is really complicated.
Yeah, for sure. And that kind of is what has led me to a lot of collaborations, because to me, the collaborative environment was how I could sort of let go of these editing things, because I didn't have quite as much personal investment in it, or at least not insofar as I was like, I am crafting my statement right now. Instead, it was just, we are making a thing. And doing that with a lot of different people was just kind of like a little key for me to unlocking, being able to let go more and being able to just freely create stuff without as much neuroticism. And that's been really good. And so I feel like that has taught me a lot. And now I'm that sort of coming back to that point that I'm like ready to reapply myself to my own projects at this point, because I feel a little bit better equipped.
And I'm sure you have better financial stability, right? From all this.
The collaborative stuff has really been helpful, especially with touring. I mean, obviously during COVID that all stopped, and at the time that was a huge relief to me because I was very over it. But then kind of perfect timing, beginning of 2022, I joined this band Lucius that tours a lot, and that's been a big game changer for me. And in a lot of ways, it's a great network of people and a lot of really cool creators in their own right, and they all kind of do different things, and it's really like opened up my world that way, and then also has provided some more financial flexibility, which has been great.
Yeah, it's curious for me from the outside looking in to this LA crew as to when a person is really aligned with a project and when it's strictly for pragmatic reasons. Like, you've been in a lot of projects that are very different kinds of music, right?
Yeah.
Are you always... Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to ask this without you like having to rank or kind of out yourself in respect to what's more enjoyable. But sometimes I get confused about what the person as an individual really would like to do. Even when I'm talking to Ian, it's like, did you both play in Ugly Sweaters?
Yeah. That band has an interesting history, but yes, we were both in that together.
But my question, it's like, yeah, it's so different than talking to a visual artist, but because from the outside looking in, I see you play with all these different bands. Obviously now you're putting out your own music, which will give me much more clarity into that. But what is the kind of music is Yo-Ya like what you feel most aligned with?
It's kind of been a bit of a journey, I guess. And Yo-Ya I felt very aligned with at first, and then a little bit less so when our productivity kind of fell off, which was about 5 years ago, 2018, we put out a record called that was The Half Turn, and did a lot of touring about it. And then that sort of had just wrapped up when COVID hit. And so that productivity, we actually kept writing during COVID quite a lot. We have a kind of a mass of material that now we're trying to finish. But for me, my identification with that project had sort of fallen down a bit. And so I was seeking what that was for me. that's when I made that aforementioned solo EP that was like somewhat like it. And then this latest single from me, which is, at this point is nearly 2 years old. It's like, so it's been a while, but that one I felt like very aligned with personally. I would say that's the most thing, that this Pfred project, in terms of the last music I released, I feel the most aligned with, and feel the most like personally fulfilled by, and like, and accurately expressing myself. But Yoya is a close second, because there's a ton about that project that I'll always really identify with, and some of the highest highs of my personal expressive capability has been through that project. So like, I really am proud of that band too. And I think everything else that I do is definitely less than those things. But, you know, like, but what they do is they satisfy certain genres or styles of expression that I do really love, even if they don't encompass all of me. So like Ugly Sweaters, like I love, you know, pop punk music. I had my Blink-182 phase, and not like we sound a lot like Blink-182, but it's like vaguely in the same category. And I love that stuff. And I kind of love playing bass, and it's just this great way for me to just have fun playing really loud and fast. And it's just great. I mean, it's just one of the most fun experiences playing live that I've had. It's just it's a riot. I love it. And even just rehearsing with them is super fun. And it's just like, it's just a really great laboratory for letting go of things. And we do get pretty creative in there and try a bunch of different things. It's just a fun little sandbox. And I kind of feel like that about all these other projects. And for Lucius, that's a very, very satisfying creative environment, because it's a lot of really sort of like high level people in one place, and finding a way to interact with each other and create things together is like really satisfying and fun. I don't like personally get to express myself beyond the bounds of my role in that band, which is fine. And I understand my role in that band very clearly. And like, that's kind of freeing in a way. It's like, okay, this is the place where I come to really work on being an expressive guitarist and learn how to sing background vocals in a way that's really compelling. And it's all an important part of the piece, of the whole thing, but it's very different from doing my own thing. But yeah, I would say that, just coming back to the question, the most important things to me are my personal projects. And that's,
it's a common thread.
Yeah. But I can't, you know, I also love the limited nature, and therefore like the freedom to let go of things that happens when you collaborate. And I love that part.
Yeah, I definitely relate to the idea that you can kind of find much more closure when you're working with others.
Totally. Yeah.
And sometimes it's not good. Sometimes you're just like, I don't want to deal with this other person who's stubborn, and that's the end of it.
Right. Yeah.
But it does kind of give you closure in a very odd way. Maybe not for the best betterment of the project, but it ends. And
right. I think that's true. I think in my case, I thankfully haven't had to deal with a lot of the negative sides of many of these collaborations, but in terms of like closure, like I haven't had any existential drama about any of those projects, you know? It's all just, it's much more like doing a job, but a very enjoyable job.
Yeah.
I'm here to just like get this thing as good as I can get it, and then I move on. And I love that.
So what's your strength, would you say, in all of this? Because I know you do a lot of different things. You produce as well, right?
Yeah, I do a lot of, well, not a lot, but I'm trying to do a lot more production, but I've always kind of done some. And yeah, I don't know. It's a good question, because I've been thinking about it a lot recently in the last couple of years. Through playing with Lucius, I've been thinking a lot about those strengths, what they are, because I'm interfacing with other musicians in that band, and the other guitar player, the original guitar player in Lucius, Pete, his name is Peter Lalish, is just like a very singular, talented artist, and he's just like such a force musically, And so it's really interesting to figure out how to like be the yin to that yang, so to speak, and what it is that's needed for something. And it might not be the thing I want to do the most, but it's a fun challenge to try to do that. I guess I would say that my strengths are that, I mean, kind of, it's sort of sad to admit it to myself, but I think that one of my strengths is really just like consistency and being like very solid, sort of from a compositional standpoint. And that's sad only because I really love like wild creativity. And that's kind of in the Lucius context, that's what Peter does. He's the loose cannon, and I'm like the stable rock, which is important to have so that the loose cannon can like do the loose cannon-y stuff. And I've sort of learned that that's a strength of mine. It's not something that I just don't love the idea of it, but I do admit that it is one of my strengths. And it's kind of always been because I have this like classical music background, and I've always taken a very compositional approach to writing, and only learned how to improvise like much later in life than a lot of musicians. And so that like wild creativity is like, has just been a much smaller piece of how I create things. I much more commonly would just, sit and write and hone and refine, which I think is perfectly fine and yields, obviously, like lots of great music is made that way. But I've definitely grown to love and appreciate the spontaneous things about music a lot more in the last few years. So I'm trying to kind of embrace that more myself. I also really love sonic world building. I've always been really into that sort of soundscapey things. I'm much more attracted immediately to the atmosphere of music and the sort of sonic qualities of music first, and the lyrics and melodies sort of second. Those things are really important to me, but I can really be taken by an atmosphere or to use the words that the kids use, a vibe. I really love that though. And I really think that there's something about it that can be very like elemental and affecting in a really basic sort of like human way, which I love. That's sort of what I get from the atmosphere behind music and the atmosphere of music.
Yeah. Have you seen the Billy Joel on Howard Stern interview?
No.
He gets into that quite a bit, how he hates that he hates putting words to music, so he doesn't do it anymore.
Interesting.
But it's a very interesting interview in general. And
well, that's a really interesting take from someone like Billy Joel, who's like this master lyricist, melody maker. I
think so. Yeah, I love Billy Joel. I'd recommend
it. Yeah, he's the best. I'll definitely watch that. Yeah. Billy Joel is one of the heavy rotation things I had as a child. It was growing up was Paul Simon's Graceland, Michael Jackson's Thriller, and Billy Joel's, I wonder which record it was.
Yeah, I was going to ask, The Stranger?
Yeah, The Stranger was definitely around a lot. Let me look up record covers real quick, because I would recognize the cover, I think.
52nd Street?
Maybe.
An Innocent Man. I think you'll know it when you see it.
Yeah, let's take a look. Here we are.
Let's take a trip down Joel.
Yeah, the Joel lane. Okay, well, obviously River of Dreams I had on cassette. So did a lot of River of Dreams listening. Yeah, The Stranger for sure. Glass Houses. I mean, honestly, now that I think about it, it must have been a greatest hits, because I remember only having not that many of his recordings, but there are songs from all of these records that are like part of my childhood. So it might have been a compilation record that I had, which makes more sense. But yeah,
not to get lost in the Joel, but so from the outside perspective, why do you think people approach you? Like you said, you're reliable and consistent, but if when do people think of you? When do they say, oh shit,
Yeah.
I need Fender?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, I think early on, like 10 plus years ago, it was because of the first Yo-Yo record called Nothing to Die, which had a little bit of like interesting sort of like organic reach in the LA area. We have been living in LA and we put out the record and it was like fully, zero strategy to putting it out. It was like, I cared a ton about the album and we worked on it really hard, but it was very like, it was before Spotify and before Instagram. And we were just kind of like, I don't know, not thinking a lot about putting it out, but somehow it managed to find its way around. And it was like a really fun experience to have people discover that music. Sort of, to me, it seemed like out of thin air. I don't really know how they found it. And so that was how I got a bunch of my first production jobs, was because of that. And people were just like, I want this. I don't know what it was. It was probably, it was not the consistency thing because they didn't know me.
Yeah,
it
exactly.
wasn't. So I think that, that album is sort of defined by like really sort of like a lot of bold but simple content. So it's like kind of intense acoustic guitar parts that are sort of complex and interesting sounding, and then a lot of drum machine sort of ear candy elements, and then like vocal harmony. And that's kind of, and there's some synth elements that are sort of interesting in there, but it's not like a huge wall of sound record. It's not, I don't know. It's just, it's kind of hard, I guess, to sum it all up. But at least the one song that really kind of got around, called Fireworks, was mostly about like this sort of explosive, really high singing, really sort of dynamic songwriting stuff. So I don't know. I think that's sort of what people wanted, but I don't really know. They didn't really say. They're just like, oh, I love this. Can you produce this thing? And it's not like we made anything that really sounded like that. But sometimes they would be like, okay, well, maybe we could try some drum machine stuff, because they knew that I would do that. Or can you like write a guitar part that's a little bit more like this, a little bit more like the Yo-Yo stuff? And
has that changed over time? What people think what they're trying to get out of you?
Yeah, I think so. Because the funny thing is, I have this like a sort of duplicitous like thing in my head. Like, I love really brash, loud things, but I also have this other side of me that's like probably more than half of me that really loves really understated, gentle things. And when left to my own devices, I often sort of trend towards that side. And so I don't know. I mean, I think that what people have really loved about working with me recently is just that I'm a good collaborator, and I like to explore the possibilities of things in a free and open way. I try not to be like dogmatic about how an approach needs to be. And I've really grown to love learning how to coax the best, most distilled version of someone out. And just how to like sort of focus in on what the most special thing is that they're doing, and make sure that that is getting across the right way. So yeah, I guess that maybe that's it. And then during Lucia's stuff, working with Danny, who's the drummer and sort of in-house producer for that band, it's sort of helpful to talk to him about what he thinks I'm good at, because he sort of has a good ear for that. And he often says, oh yeah, like, I think you're really great at this like world building, atmospheric, like creation of like a world for the music to be in, which makes sense because that's something that I really focus on a lot. And he also notes that I'm a good study, meaning good at just like really learning stuff, and you don't have to like teach me parts, and you don't have to like make sure I understand something about the song. Like I'll just pick all that stuff up. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe those are the things.
You're a rock.
A rock.
You're solid.
Yeah. Yeah, perhaps that's it.
But at the same time, you say it's kind of unfortunate. You wish it was a little more wild.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I think that's
but is that
is that
who you are?
That's just the nature of life, I think. You want things for yourself that other people might never want from you, because they're like, why would I want that? This is the thing that you do. Yeah. And it's hard for, I think, anybody to come to terms with that gap. But yeah, I wish that people were like, oh yeah, you need Alex to do this because it'll be crazy and you'll never expect it and it'll be so awesome. And it's like, and it's just like, that's, yeah, I wish that'd be cool. I mean, I feel like I'm sort of pushing myself to go in that direction, and it is working for me. I feel like I can sense it happening. Yeah. And in the stuff that I've made in the last year, I think it's been a much bigger part of that. And none of that music is out yet. So it's sort of like, I guess I can see why nobody else would associate me with that yet. But I hope that it starts coming across more.
So are you an individual that sees yourself as rather malleable, and that if you see a weakness, you're going to try to strengthen it, or are you going to lean into the things you're already really strong at?
Yeah, I think that I am malleable. I think I really tend to be sort of like chameleon, like to my own like frustration sometimes. I'm like, wow, I really will just take on the color of stuff. And I think that can be really helpful. It's obviously really helpful when collaborating. And I think that that's something I've accepted about myself. Like, actually, that's a good thing when what I want to do is collaborate with people, because I feel like I can kind of fit into any situation and help improve it and give it some new life, but also in a way that meshes with what's there. So I think that is an asset, especially for production, which is something I want to lean into a lot more. So it's a good thing and so in that way, it's sort of, I guess I'm kind of answering that I do both, but I'm leaning into the fact that I am malleable or something. Yeah.
And how will you know if Pfred has succeeded? Is there kind of because with personal projects, it can be difficult.
Yeah, certainly. I'm super bad at this part.
At what part? At
determining parameters of success, setting goals, and reaching goals. I've just been pathologically bad at this my whole life. I just feel like,
well, you can't be that bad at it. I mean, you've succeeded at going to school for music and then making it a career. So that's pretty.
Yeah, well, that's
pretty solid.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. Thank you. I mean, I guess that just was such. It's funny because to look at it that way, that's such a big and aimless sort of goal to have, but it is true that was kind of always just my goal, and I have done it, but it's been such a funny, circuitous, like weird path that it like doesn't feel like I've exactly done it, but I have. So it's just strange. I don't know. But how I will know that Pfred succeeded, I feel like.
Or succeeds. I mean, it's isn't it infantile, fetal at this point?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, you're right. So, yeah. I guess one level of that, something very goal oriented that I've always wanted to do, and a lot of my friends have, sort of worked at and succeeded at, which has been a big inspiration for me. It's not like they're stuck in some way of doing things, and some people just are productive and prolific and some aren't. But some of my friends have really leaned into this, like, I will be prolific. Here's how much music I will make. And they've like really succeeded at doing that, which has been really inspiring for me to see. So like, I think that's one measure. I will feel like it would be great if I could set some reasonable goals for how productive, like how much music is going to be released and when. It's sort of anathema to how I like to make things, because I don't usually like to do that, but I feel like it can be at least a flexible, broad goal and
Sure.
exist, because having any goal would have helped me release more than what I have so far, so like that's one measure of success. The whole Spotify numbers thing is a whole other game that I've like have accepted is important. So I don't really know what my goal would be with that, but as I like get closer to releasing more music, I want to have more of a kind of like a target number in mind, or like a series of numbers, and like how do I get from one step to the next step. And for me, like, nothing makes music feel more real and lived in than doing live performance. I mean, it's like the most important part to me.
Mm-hmm.
As much as I love creating stuff and tinkering around, it doesn't really like feel like it's real. It has like no touch. It has no like electricity until it's actually being like played for people in real life. So that's something I've never played a Pfred show. So that would be a very straightforward goal for that.
So yeah, it sounds like quantity is important.
Yeah, quantity is important, because right now there's no quantity.
But you're not
Yeah.
sitting there and going like, oh, I need fucking a platinum record or this many followers or this many listens. Are those things on your mind, or is that not really part of the goal?
No, they're on my mind as well, especially as I've seen as that reality has gotten closer and closer to me, not because I've gotten closer and closer to those goals, but because the degrees of separation between me and the people who are achieving those things has grown tiny. And now
Yeah.
I'm like 1 degree away from people who are doing that. It makes it feel a lot more like that's something that actually happens in life,
Sure.
and a little bit less like something I just read about. And so that makes me want it more. And because I can see how transformative it can be for people. And, I just, something about like my upbringing made me sort of like have this kind of like strange view about prioritizing success, or prioritizing, or like celebrating success. It was not, I don't know. I feel like somehow I got to the point in life where I just considered, I was told the message so many times that like, well, success isn't the thing that matters. What matters is like what you learn from it, or what matters is the friends you make, or what, whatever, like these things that are true. But I've got that message so relentlessly that I started to feel like success was completely beside the point and didn't matter at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really changed as I've seen what success can do for people. And I'm like, actually, I want that for sure. I definitely want that. Of course I want that. And I've been working towards it.
What do you think it can do?
Admitting
What can it do?
I mean, the most important things that I want for myself that I've seen other people achieve is like flexibility with their lives. They're able to have their modest comforts without very much effort. They're able to travel and experience life sort of like as they want to on their own terms, without having to like really be worried about how they were going to make it work financially. It's not like they have crazy lifestyles or anything. It's just like, they're sort of just living the way they want to. And most importantly, that is like very important. But I think almost more importantly is access to further creative endeavors is like limitless. And that is so cool to me. Like, my favorite thing about some people's success is how much it has brought out more success and more art and more of like more creation. It's like not about getting a platinum record so they can like hide in their mansion. It's so they can continue working with younger and less experienced or successful, but still really great artists or whatever it is that they want to do. It all feels like it's right there. And the music industry can be so tiny. When you get up to the higher echelons, everyone knows each other and everyone's just like, I don't know, it just feels very immediate and right out there, but it's not really accessible to you without some level or some level of success or some association with a level of success. And
that's a great answer.
Yeah.
You agree?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that's like, and that's the thing that I agree that my answer was just
no. So I'm I am curious to hear more about the thing you said before, which I find very interesting, in respect to the undervaluing of success in the kind of tangible metrics. Because I talk about it quite a bit, where like, I think there's certain metrics that are really tangible that are helpful, and then there's other ones that aren't. But also sometimes they correlate, like maybe likes do correlate to sales, and maybe sales do correlate to everything you just said. But where do you think that idea came from that you, like, were you raised Christian?
So, yes, I was.
Because there's almost I was raised Christian, and I feel like there's an aspect of humility, which I think is good. But it can get conflated and abused as a kind of like mediocrity, or just kind of stay in the corner. Yeah, just
idea. Be quiet and be humble. Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally think that is true, and I was raised Christian, and I mean I think that is the beautiful thing about Christianity. If there is something there, is the humility aspect to it, which is why like I have this funny sort of like thing in life where a lot of people don't know I was raised Christian. And I don't identify with Christianity very much anymore. And I certainly don't like practice Christianity. I haven't since I was like not really able to do it of my own volition anyway. Like I was just raised Christian. It was just a thing that was sort of automatic. But I actually do like, there are some things about it that I really do like. And it's so anathema to the way most people like perceive Christianity which is like this total like abuse of what it's supposed to be. And it's completely backwards. And like the mega church thing is just such a joke compared to what Christianity is supposed to be about. So yeah, I do think that was probably part of it. I also had, like my parents are like hippies, and they were very much like part of the counterculture world. And that did not mean be quiet. Like I never had a repressed childhood. I was never told not to like do things. I was really encouraged to play music. We had a very like musical household. Me and both my older brothers played. We like had to start playing piano when we were young, and we all played.
You had to?
Oh yeah. I mean,
I like that.
Yeah, we were absolutely forced to do it. I mean, and I have really learned to appreciate that so much, because I never would have done it without being forced to do it.
Sure.
And it has totally changed my life, like completely shaped it. And I was bribed to start playing violin. I was really into Star Wars cards when I was a kid. And when I was 10 and I moved from Kansas, where I was born, to Oregon, where I grew up the rest of the way, my mom was just like, okay, well, I will buy you the Obi-Wan Kenobi card if you start playing violin. And I was like, done. Yeah. Absolutely. And easy. So, yeah, that's such an easy calculation. So, that was all really encouraged. And so like being sort of like, quote, loud in that way was celebrated. It was like, yeah, do stuff, and I did like composition. They had a little composition contest in Manhattan, Kansas, where I was born, that I entered when I had just started playing piano. and I won that competition, which was like really funny for me. And I still have this little plaque that I got for it, and so I've been doing that on some level ever since then. And that part was celebrated, but it was more that that it was like, well, definitely the Christian part was that opulence and celebration of wealth was absolutely like
Sure.
looked down on. Like, don't do that. Don't, motorized recreational activities like boats with motors on them and jet skis, super looked down on by
That's
family.
awesome. That's so
We
specific.
were like, we are not, if we're going camping, like we're going to go there in a car and we're going to have a tent, but like we are definitely not going to bring any like gadgets or toys. And if you do that, you're like a loser.
It's true. It's true. Wait, but what about electric guitars and things like that?
Well, that was really hard for my parents, actually, I think.
Nice.
That when I dug out my dad's Gibson J45 from his closet when I was 14 and was like, I'm going to start playing this. I was extremely just like obsessed with the Beatles. I found them when I was about that age. I had always sort of casually listened to the Beatles since I was a child and was really hyper aware of like, you either liked Beatles or you liked Elvis. That was a thing that me and my friends sort of like agreed on when we were 7. And so I had Beatles records because I was a Beatles fan and not an Elvis fan or a Beach Boys fan. I sort of like defined my musical taste in opposition to those things, which I always thought was funny. But I did. Anyway, I really got into the Beatles when I was 14, and that Paul McCartney Back in the US tour was like televised on PBS. I don't know if you saw that. It was like I
did not know.
It was like a, I don't know, 4-part tour thing. So maybe like a 4-hour long special. And I watched that just religiously because it was like a mini Beatles anthology. It sort of went over their whole story and their whole history while also doing these concerts. And it just like threw me into Beatles mania big time. And I just revisited all their records. I learned all their songs. And that was when I was like, I need to play guitar. And I got it out and I started doing it. And my mom quickly was like, okay, well, you need to still play violin. Like this can't replace violin. And I was like, okay, it won't. But of course, like my heart had already like moved on, but I kept playing violin until I graduated high school, but I really didn't care about it that much anymore. And they finally conceded and got me an electric guitar, I think when I was like 15 or so. Yeah, I think a year later. So that, that was a shift for them because they were like, because they were hippies, but they were also hippies that were still into Bob Dylan after he went electric. Like, I don't know how incensed they really were about that thing.
Sure.
They still had, Jimi Hendrix records, but they probably put a little bit more value on the folkier side of the hippie world.
On humanity.
Yeah.
I respect that immensely, I think. And to be fair, the humility of Christianity is meant to stop individuals from thinking they are God. I think that's the point. Like pride, you conflate yourself with a God, which I think artists often do, and that you can see it destroy their life pretty rapidly. And success does it to people as well. Yeah. I think as you get older, at least for me, you have to untie a lot of these knots because my Christianity it kind of flowed into punk rock ethics where it's just like the same ideas, I guess, in some sense. Yeah, there's kind of this frowning upon success or mass acceptance or
deification of a person or a rock star. I do really love that. I definitely rejected punk as a teenager because I thought it was musically inferior to what I was into, but that's sort of the point. I got much more into punk later. Like I never got deeply into it, but I appreciate it much more than I used to now. And I love that part of it. I love like there are no rock stars thing. I think that's awesome. It
is in a way, but but it can lead into a kind of rejection of superiors, like geniuses. Like there's definitely musicians and artists who are superior to us. And I think that kind of blanketing is very convenient when you're not one of those people.
When you're not good, yeah.
Yeah. No, not even, like, you can be good and just be like, oh, I'm not great. I'm never going to be that great.
Yeah, right.
So I think there's upside and downside to both of those processes, but I think it makes sense. You know, for me, it took a while to just be even remotely comfortable with certain forms of success. I'm still not comfortable with social media as like a more involved process, something outside of a portfolio.
Right.
But it looks like you're rather expressive on your Instagram.
Yeah, I tend to, I've never been disciplined enough, or probably a combination of discipline and also like you, sort of rejection of like, I don't know, the businessy side of it. I've never been disciplined at like creating content on a schedule. I've never been able to do that with any social media. I mean, when Yo-Yo was in its infancy, I was friends with Jack Conti of Pomplamoose, and later now the CEO of Patreon, and maybe he's a little bit more famous for that now. But at the time, you know, Pomplamoose was like making all these YouTube videos. They were like this big YouTube thing. And so for a second, we did that. We made a few videos on YouTube, and I'm actually really proud of those videos. I think they're really pretty good. But despite feeling good about those, we never entered a rhythm. Like we just couldn't do it. And that's like the main defining characteristic of social media success, is like scheduled creation. And we just never did that. I've never done that. I don't know why. I just like can't figure that out. I can't want it enough to make it happen.
Yeah.
But I just go through little fits and starts with Instagram. I think it's a great way to express things, and I just don't ever do it consistently. But then when I do it, I tend to do it kind of a lot at once, and then I stop, and the cycle repeats.
Right.
But I'm not so against it that I've deleted it ever or gone off of it completely. I know people that have, and I think that's pretty sweet, but I also am afraid to do that. So,
so what do you want from Pfred? In the end, I actually want to I just want an establishment as an artist that people can listen to and go see shows of. And I just like I would love to do some tours. I'd love to do like 1 or 2 tours a year. I want it to sort of be this like low level but consistent thing that I just like always do. I have a lot of respect for that. I mean, speaking of consistency, but that feels much more real and valuable type of consistency as compared to like posting on social media. But I love when acts have been around forever, and when people are like, oh yeah, you just like, he performs every month or twice every 2 months or whatever. And, you know, it's just like, maybe you sell 100 or 200 tickets to your shows and people love them, and it's more like community focused. That would be great. I would consider that like a big success if that was what that project became. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I just asked because I think I don't assume everyone secretly has the exact same goal.
Yeah.
You know? I think we're all human and we all want attention of different types.
Yeah.
I do think, there's spiritual goals at play here, I'm sure, for you.
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't know if you...
for sure.
I don't know if you have that aspect.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
In what sense?
I'm probably not going to be able to put very good words to it, but I just have always sort of felt that music has always had a spiritual place in my life, because that was my first, also sort of in like a Christian way. Like all of my early music exposure was to religious music. But
like hippie Christian, like What kind of music, or just church music?
Mostly church music. I love the idea of hippie Christian, and I want to talk more about what that might be. But
No, it's a thing. It's definitely a thing.
okay, I'm ignorant of that. I'm
Really?
excited to hear about
it was
that.
a big aspect of the hippie movement.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, maybe that is kind of like what spoke to my parents. I always kind of wondered why they became Christian, why they raised their children Christian. Maybe that has some answers for me in there. But the no, like, because playing classical music, obviously, huge majority of classical music from before a certain period was like expressly religious, and it was like that was its point. And so piano and violin in that way, orchestral music, I sang in choirs. So there's just like loads of religious music and all that, definitely a majority, a huge majority. And then of course any music from church, which is some of my earliest participation in music, of course, all hymns and stuff. So it's just always been like that. And I've always like identified really strongly with music that has those overtones. And like, I don't like expressly religious music, especially like modern expressly religious music, like doesn't really mean much to me, or it feels like kind of like a put on. But stuff that's just outside of the directly religious, I do really love. Like Sufjan Stevens, I love his music, and I think that he's got this like thread through so much of his stuff that has this like Christian
completely
bent. And I, even though like if you know that about him, you're like, yeah, of course. And if you don't know that about him, you might not get it, at first. Until he drops the J word in a song, and you're like, oh, but it's just
the J word. I think the problem you're identifying with quote unquote Christian modern music is it's just a commodification of an identity, like a lot of other things. It's just like on the nose pandering. Yeah. It's not Sufjan, who honestly is struggling with his identity of Christianity for many reasons, and that happens to be part of his expression. So yeah, there's just really these kind of opportunistic individuals who maybe have some mid-level talent at creating things, who I think are very savvy about like identity and consumerism. And, I always say to people, like, reggae is clearly Christian music. I mean, it's some of the most overt Christian music. Obviously, Kanye put out that one album, which actually multiple albums, I guess, at this point, which is an interesting example. But that's a long. It's a weird history, I would say. I don't know what it means to be a Christian artist anymore.
Yeah, beyond. I mean, I feel like the only touchstones I have are like the stuff that I really don't like, and then there's like POD and like Christian rock bands from like our high school time, which of course I don't love, and then and then the stuff that's more oblique, like Sufjan.
People who are incidentally something, which is the best kind of expression. Typically isn't telling you to be something,
right,
or how to be,
right. Yeah.
In respect to who's like judging you from the metaphorical sidelines, who are musicians that if they told you your music was bad, you would die?
Ooh, I love that. I guess I would first say, probably Sufjan.
I was going to say it's probably Sufjan.
Like someone who's like really nice or seems to be, or seems to like only put out positive energy. And then if they were like, I hate your shit, I'd be like, oh my God, I've like broken two things. Like I've made you be negative because it's that bad. And you also don't like it, which I hate. I was going to say, I also sort of similar to my Beatles phase, I had like an extremely strong, protracted Radiohead phase. And, but the thing is, Tom sort of hates everything, or it seems like he does. So if he said he didn't like it, it would hurt, but I don't think I would hurt that much. Cause I would sort of expect it. Maybe,
they can be dead.
Okay. Uh,
It sounds like
if
the Beatles.
George
Okay.
Harrison. If George
Yeah.
Harrison didn't like it, that would make me really sad.
Well, I feel
If
like
John,
that says a lot about you, that Harrison is your main Beatle.
yeah, I mean, I also am a huge Paul fan, and that's like, I think that I like that because people tend to just sort of like think that they should like John Lennon and they should hate Paul, and there's so much like popular discourse about hating Paul and liking John.
Yeah, no, I'm Paul over
I just
John.
think that ignores just blatant facts about their abilities. Like Paul is clearly just a monster talent in so many ways, and if you're out there saying that's not true, you're stupid, in my opinion. And yeah, I mean Paul too, but I think I would feel it in my heart more if George didn't like it, because I love his like philosophy, and he's just a little bit more someone the Beatle I identify with more.
What is his philosophy, George?
Well, I feel like I shouldn't go on the record saying what it is because I'm probably wrong or like
That's
only
fine.
partially informed. But
Doesn't matter.
if I was going to say my interpretation of his philosophy is like very detached from outcomes. He's very like, he just, there's this interview that they're giving, in like 1964 at like the height of Beatlemania. And an interviewer is saying like, well, you have like the number one song on the charts right now. And like, what do you think is going to happen with the Beatles essentially? And he's like, well, I don't really know. But I know that I'm probably getting this kind of wrong, but the part of it I do really remember. I think he said something like, we love playing music or something to that effect. But the thing he says that I really remembered is he was like, I think that we do this for music. And so whether we are up here or down there, meaning on the charts or in popularity, I think we'll be doing it for at least another couple of years. And I just thought that was so awesome because he wasn't like, yeah, well, there's no ego in it. He wasn't like, I think we'll keep getting number ones, or like, he didn't even say, I hope we keep getting number ones. He was just sort of like, yeah, well, we like it. And so even if it's not successful, we'll keep doing it for at least a while. And just knowing that came out of the mind of a Beatle is just kind of crazy. So I don't know, I guess that says something about his philosophy. I also love All Things Must Pass. And like I love that he was a gardener, and that he was just like, in like 1970 something, he was saying like, I'm a gardener. I plant things and I watch them grow. That's what I do. I love that. I kind of love, even in a sad way, that he was sort of thwarted as a Beatle and as an artist under the yoke of these like just generational talents of Paul and John. And he was like also writing really great stuff, but was sort of forced into this like small role. And sort of reading some of the interviews about that stuff. Like, for example, I think, Paul McCartney was talking, they were being interviewed, and this was like in 1969, maybe, or 8. And after Abbey Road, actually, so it must have been 69 or 70 or something, but like shortly before they broke up. And Paul said something to the effect of, he was asked like, why doesn't George have more songs or something like that? And he was like, well, I think he's always written songs, and lately those songs have been really good. And so I think that's why we're using more of his songs now. And this was I think in direct reference to the song Something. And George said something like, well, I wrote that like 3 years ago, but whatever.
Nobody cared.
Yeah.
Nobody's paying attention.
Yeah. Or sort of,
so yeah,
it's like, well,
sense.
I have this talent. I am better than you give me credit for, but he sort of just had to kind of, it's hard to say that he suffered because he's one of the most revered, successful musicians that ever lived. But it's true that he still sort of like had this second fiddle status. And then he had this thing where after the Beatles broke up, he had sort of put out the word. He's like, can I please be the first one to release a solo record? Because I like basically have one already, and it would just mean a lot to me to be able to do that. Like after this, I'm kind of putting words in his mouth, but I think it's sort of like after being essentially the Paul and John vehicle for 7 or 8 years, like I'd really love to come out of this with a fresh start. And I don't know if people said yes or not, but regardless, Paul was the first one to release a record because he was just like, no, I'm going to do that. Which that's the really shitty side of Paul, is he's just sort of like merciless and ruthless. And that sucks. And it's sad that George, like, I don't think ultimately it really mattered, but I think it's just a dimension to his soul that is, I don't know, sort of touching.
Yeah, no,
and that he put out All Things Must Pass is like this, the message of that record in the light of all those events just means all the more. And yeah, that's why I would hate to be rejected by George Harrison.
So concise. I mean,
Yeah.
he did write a number one song about Jesus. So that's,
Yeah.
I don't know if there exists another one like that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That is a hell of a song.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, I think we covered everything. You know what, though? If there were 3 songs that people should listen to understand the soul, the essence of who you are as an artist, whether solo or with someone, what would those be?
Are you talking about music of mine?
Yeah.
Or music that I would, oh.
No. It could be anything. It could be a collaboration or,
Okay, let's see. I think that the Pfred single that I mentioned, Alice, One More Week, is a good one because it's my most recent work, and yeah, I like that one. I think the Yo-Yo song Fireworks, because it was sort of a very, very good expression of who I was, at least at one point. And as for the third,
Is there a song where you really shine, even if it's not your song?
Let's see.
Or are you more hidden in the background, gluing things together?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of Yo-Yo songs that I would name, but since I've already put one in, I'll move on from there. I mean, all the Yo-Yo discography, a lot of that stuff I feel very like represents me, or did. I think that the latest record I produced that just came out on Friday, which is Lauren O'Connell is the artist, and the album is called Everything Feels Ridiculous. And I feel I'm definitely, I'm producer. I played a lot of instruments on the record, a lot of guitar, some bass, or actually all the bass, bunch of keys and other stuff. And I do some background vocals and whatever. So I'm sort of like all over the record in a supporting role. But I think that the song, there's a few songs on that record that I think I shine on as a producer or player. And like, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to say 2. So the song Horsefly, which is one of the singles from the record, and another one called I Want to Be Your Man. And those are both songs that I just really love. They're great as songs, and they sort of represent what I would do in a production environment. Horsefly sort of takes a really sort of like subdued song and puts it into a more sort of like optimistic, lighthearted atmosphere. We always said as we were making it that like made this sad song sort of like run through a meadow in the summertime or something. and that's kind of what it feels like. And then I Want to Be Your Man just has some guitar stuff that I really like in it that I did, and it's just a great song.
Perfect. Well, I'll link to those in the bio or whatever the description of the podcast.
Perfect.
And
sounds great.
Pleasure talking to you. I hope you have a good day.
Thanks. You too. I hope we cross paths again at some point.
I can't imagine we won't.
I mean, yeah, at some point soon is, I guess, what I was going to say.
I think
I'll
we will.
see you again before we die.
I think so.
Yeah, I feel like it'll happen soon.
I mean, I do run a music venue at this point, so.
Yeah, that seems inevitable. Yeah, I should come out to New York. I should play a show at your space. That would be cool.
Why not?
Yeah. Okay.
When are you coming out to New York next?
I'm going to think about that. Currently no touring plans. We hit New York a lot this year. I was just there in August, but I don't currently have any plans to go out there right now, although my brother lives there. So maybe I will come visit him before any tours happen. But I'll let you know when a plan is forming.
Sounds good.
All right, Michael.
You got anything else you need to get off your chest publicly? You want to call anyone out?
Yeah, I'd love to settle some scores right now.
That should be part of. I think that should be part of the podcast.
Yeah, that would be good. You should do like 3 songs that you, I think, identify, and also 1 score you'd like to settle. Just go ahead.
Yeah.
Right,
Any beefs
right
you want to start?
Yeah.
Or you could squash a beef.
Yeah, I could eat some beef.
Mm-hmm.
Squash a beef that sounds sort of like burying the hatchet. That's not really the same as.
It's completely different. Yeah.
Getting even. Yeah. A little more conciliatory. I'd like to call out my high school nemesis, Veronica. I don't know why you didn't like me, but you didn't.
Okay.
So
that's it.
That.
You only get 1. That's staying in the recording, by the way. So.
Perfect.
All right.
All right, dude. I'll talk to you later.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Music by Dori Bavarsky and Mingji Chen. Next up, we have Banu Pratap.